In my Indian family, a girl's voice was treated like a threat, something to silence before her 16th birthday. But I taught my cousins a different kind of language, and together, we shattered the quiet prison generations of Indian daughters had been forced to call tradition. The first time I understood what silence really meant, I was 12. Not the kind of silence where the room is still and waiting, but the kind that suffocates. The kind that wraps around your throat like a velvet rope, soft enough to look harmless, tight enough to make breathing impossible. In my family, a girl's voice wasn't hers to keep. After her 16th birthday, her words belonged to the men, her father, her husband, her grandfather. She was expected to stop speaking entirely. No protest, no laughter, no storytelling. Her tongue became a threat, and her silence became a badge of honor. We called it the quiet, like it was a blessing, not a cage. At 16, the ceremony would begin at midnight. The girl would be brought before the family altar, dressed in white. Her father would hold her still, and her mother would tie a red thread around her wrist. That red thread was symbolic, a silent warning stitched into skin. It wasn't sewn through her lips, but it may as well have been. Break the vow once, and you'd go a day without food. Twice, you'd lose something permanent. A tooth, a lock of hair. No one dared break it a third time. Women's silence became currency. The quieter your daughters, the more respected your household. At family gatherings, my uncles would compare their daughters' silence like trophies. Mira hasn't spoken since January. Uncle Avi would beam, tapping his fingers on the table like poker chips. Oh, please! Uncle Vinod would scoff. Priya's going on 2 years. The doctor asked her a question and she pointed at me. They said it with pride. They called it tradition. I called it madness. But I was different. I was loud by nature, the kind of girl who laughed at her own jokes and sang off key in the hallway. I mimicked cartoon voices, clapped at movies, asked too many questions. I knew I wouldn't survive the quiet, not without losing myself. Still, part of me hoped the tradition would somehow skip me, like a storm that veers off course. But that storm was heading straight for me, and it had already swallowed generations of women before me. Then something happened that changed everything. In 7th grade, our teacher, Ms. Brown, told us we had to choose a foreign language, French, Spanish, or ASL, American Sign Language. My hand shot up before I even thought about it. Something about it felt right. Not just right, vital. I wasn't sure why. Not yet. I just knew that my voice was running out of time. And this could be my escape hatch. My family had only moved to the temporarily. The plan was always to send the girls home after 16, back to the motherland to marry and disappear into quiet obedience. We were like seeds carried in the wind, never meant to take root. But ASL became my secret rebellion. 3 times a week, I sat in a quiet classroom and learned how to speak without making a sound. I practiced fingerspelling under the desk, my heart thudding every time Ms. Brown texted our progress to parents. If they found out, I didn't let myself think about what would happen. There was no one to sign to, no one who would understand. But I kept learning anyway. It felt like loading a slingshot, even if I didn't yet know where I'd aim. Then came Diwali, a celebration wrapped in color and noise and family. Except, of course, for the women, who served silently. That night, as firecrackers popped in the distance and spices perfumed the air, I saw Priya sitting at the end of the long table. Her eyes shimmered with tears she couldn't explain. She was 17, a full year into silence. The rule had already taken her. I slipped her a glass of water with a note pressed beneath. Meet me by the garden shed. Bring your sister. When the men settled into their cricket match and the silenced women began cleaning dishes, I told everyone I was showing Priya how to fold her sari better. That's how it began, in whispers and shadows, behind the illusion of obedience. Every gathering after that, while the men compared scores and the women served without voices, I taught the younger girls how to speak without sound, letters at first, then words, then entire conversations flowing through our hands like water through cracks in stone. We signed behind trays of food, beneath soapy water in sinks, under tablecloths with practiced subtlety. We made our own gestures. A flick of the wrist meant danger. A thumb swipe meant pause. A closed fist meant listen. By the time I turned 15, we were 12 strong, girls between 9 and 15, all fluent in the language the men could never control. The older women watched us in silence, but said nothing. Some of them even started copying us. The ripple was becoming a wave, but it was a wedding that broke the dam. The day of the wedding was drenched in gold, the kind of gold that blinds you if you stare too long. Anjali, my cousin, stood beneath a garland of marigolds, her wrists stacked with bangles that jingled like chains. She was 15. Her groom, 65. He had chosen her specifically, they said, because she was well trained in silence. A prized possession in a community where obedience glittered brighter than diamonds. She stood perfectly still, her red sari wrapped so tightly it looked like armor. Her mouth didn't move, her eyes didn't blink. But then I saw her little sister, only 11, standing stiffly at the edge of the ceremony and staring straight at me. Her tiny hands trembled, but her fingers moved with purpose. "He hits her," she signed. Then she lifted her sleeve. Bruises, blooming down her arm like rotten fruit. Angeli didn't flinch as her life was being signed away. She couldn't. She wasn't allowed. Something inside me cracked open, something that had been holding itself together with threads of fear and habit. And when the priest reached the final vow, I did the unthinkable. I stood up, but I didn't use my hands this time. I used my voice, the very weapon they'd tried to dull from the day I was born. "She doesn't want this," I said, louder than I'd ever dared. "He's been hurting her." The room froze. 200 guests turned as if yanked by strings. I felt every gaze land on my body like arrows. My mother's face turned the color of ashes. My father's hand closed around my arm like a vice, hissing words that dripped with panic and fury. But before he could drag me away, other voices rose. 6 of them. 6 girls stood, their voices dry from years of disuse. One shouted, "We know about the beatings. You seriously think this is okay? It's illegal." Then came the sound none of us had expected, the wail of police sirens. Through the open courtyard windows, red and blue lights spun against the twilight. A CPS van pulled in behind the cruisers. Someone had called them. To this day. I don't know who. Maybe one of the older women. Maybe a neighbor. Maybe fate itself had decided enough was enough. The ceremony fell apart in seconds. The groom tried to slip out through the back. Officers blocked his path. Angeli was gently separated from the crowd and taken into a quiet room where she finally spoke. Not with words, but with tears and nods and the bruises she could now show freely. Meanwhile, my father's grip dug deeper into my skin, his voice low and dangerous in my ear. I saw the same storm raging on other girls' faces as their fathers hissed threats. But no one could strike us now, not with the authorities watching. One uncle, Dev, lost control anyway. He grabbed his daughter by the hair in front of everyone. She screamed, and an officer tackled him before he could vanish into the chaos. That was the moment everything shifted. The men weren't in charge anymore. Not fully. When the officers announced the wedding was being shut down, it felt like someone had dropped a match on dry grass. The air was thick with years of silence burning at the edges. The guests scattered like frightened birds. My father dragged me toward the car, not saying a word, just seething, the kind of rage that simmers under skin and waits for privacy. My mother followed, prayer beads clutched in her hand like a weapon, but her eyes didn't meet mine. Not once. In the car, I stared out the window as buildings blurred into streaks of neon and shadow. My father called me a disgrace, said I had humiliated him, that the men would never respect him again. My mother whispered ancient verses in Sanskrit under her breath, a desperate rhythm she clung to like a drowning woman clings to air. When we got home, I didn't get a chance to defend myself. He took my phone, my laptop, my voice. He locked me in my room and slammed the door, the lock clicking shut on the outside like punctuation. Through the vent in the floor, I could hear him making calls. I recognized the names, uncles, cousins, elders. He warned them to keep their girls home from school. Said the police would come asking questions. Said it was time to tighten the circle. I lay on my bed, eyes wide open, thinking about Angeli, wondering where she was now, wondering if she finally felt safe. Then, a knock. Soft, almost imagined. The door creaked open and my Aunt Mira stepped in, holding a plate of warm rice and da. She had never spoken in my presence, but her eyes were heavy with words. She didn't say a thing. Just placed the food on the table, touched my cheek gently, and showed me her phone. It was a group chat. My cousins. They were scared. They were grateful. They were watching. Some had already been locked in their rooms, stripped of phones, isolated like I was. Others were still in their homes, pretending everything was fine, waiting, hoping, fearing. My aunt pointed to her heart, then to me. She couldn't speak, but I understood. She was proud, and that was the moment I realized I had started something that could not be undone. At dawn, my door opened. My father didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His silence had a shape now, hard and cold and final. He told me to wear my finest sari, the blue one with gold embroidery. We were going to my grandfather's house. That name alone made my stomach turn. He was the architect of all this, the man who had twisted silence into a tradition and handed it down like a family heirloom. 3 generations of women had fallen beneath his rule, their voices traded for his honor. The drive was long. We passed through fields that looked peaceful from a distance, but I knew better. I had seen what bloomed behind closed doors. My mother sat in the back, still clutching those prayer beads like they were the only thing keeping her soul intact. No one spoke the entire way. When we arrived, the house stood like a fortress, massive, isolated, a shrine to control. The driveway was already full. 20 cars. Every uncle, every cousin with a voice was there. But not the women. Never the women. Inside, they had arranged cushions in a semicircle, a male parliament cloaked in tradition. My grandfather sat in the center, his spine impossibly straight despite his age. He looked at me like I was a bug that had crawled across his dinner plate. "Explain yourself," he said. So I did. Slowly, clearly, I told him about Angeli's bruises, about the groom, about the fear. About the law. He laughed. He said I'd been poisoned by American thinking, that I didn't understand our way, that girls like me were dangerous. The questions began like a quiet tide. Who taught you to disobey? Who else knows this hand language? Which girls were involved? I told them only what they already knew, about Angeli. Nothing more. I kept my voice even, refusing to give them what they wanted names. Uncle Raj stood up, red-faced and shaking. He said I'd infected their daughters, that I was a plague, that all of this was my fault. And then they began bringing the girls in, one by one, like prisoners on trial. The first was Kavya, Priya's little sister. Just 12. Her clothes hung off her like they belonged to someone else. Her lip quivered as her grandfather asked if she knew sign language. She looked at me, then the floor. Her father barked something sharp, and the back of his hand struck her head. She nodded. Yes. I swallowed the scream that rose in my throat. They brought in more. Maya, Asha, Neela. Girls who had once giggled over mango lassies and hid behind me during water fights. Now, they trembled beneath the eyes of men who claimed to love them. Some admitted the truth immediately. Others denied it until threats made them fold. Maya lasted the longest. She was 14, fierce and bright and clever. But when her father twisted her wrist hard enough, she cried out and nodded too. Even little Asha. 9. Too young to understand what was happening, only knowing she wasn't allowed to cry for her mother anymore. That was when my grandfather stood and declared this was an infection, that it needed to be purged, that silence must be restored. The ceremonies begin tonight, he said. They've earned it early. No one objected. Not really. Some looked unsure, but none dared speak against him. They separated us into rooms like cattle. Mine was in the basement, a cold, unfinished cell with cinder block walls and a moldy mattress. A single window near the ceiling let in a stripe of light that felt crueler than darkness. He said I would stay there until I learned respect. The door slammed and locked. The sound of it echoed like thunder in a tomb. I spent 3 days in that box. Twice a day. Someone dropped off cold rice and water. No words. No glances. I moved constantly. Push-ups, jumping jacks, pacing in tight circles. Anything to keep the numbness from swallowing me whole. I counted cracks in the wall, listed every ASL word I knew. I imagined Angeli's face. I whispered poetry into the mildew-soaked air just to remember what a voice felt like. And every night, the sun would disappear from the wall. And with it, hope. Until the 4th morning. I heard a car pull up, not one of ours. The engine was smoother, newer. Then, a woman's voice, asking for me by name, my counselor, Ms. Brown. My heart leapt, then froze. She asked to see me. My grandfather answered smoothly, said I had the flu, was resting. She didn't back down. I'm a mandated reporter. I heard her say, if I don't see her, I make the call. The argument grew louder, more brittle. My grandfather's voice slipped from syrupy calm into something closer to panic. Then, footsteps. Fast. Angry. The basement door creaked open. He tossed a clean sari at me and told me to make myself presentable. Smile, he whispered. Or, your cousins will pay. I dressed with shaking hands, the fabric stiff against my skin. Tried to flatten my tangled hair. Wiped my face with my sleeve. Upstairs, Ms. Brown stood in the living room like a wall no one could move. Her eyes scanned me. Took in the sunken cheeks, the bruises hiding beneath powder, the way I flinched when my grandfather's hand touched my shoulder. Are you okay? She asked. I nodded, lying through my teeth. Just sick. She didn't blink. She asked why I hadn't answered her messages. My grandfather smiled. No screens while she's recovering. Doctor's orders. She didn't buy it. Then she looked at me and asked if I remembered last week's ASL lesson. My heart pounded. She couldn't see my hands, but she could see the mirror behind me. I signed help. She didn't flinch, but her eyes locked on mine and something in her nodded. As she left with a promise in her eyes, my grandfather's hand struck my face so hard I saw stars, and I knew he had seen the reflection too. He threw me back into the basement, my cheeks stinging, blood pooling behind my teeth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give him that. But I knew something now. Ms. Brown had seen me, and she wasn't done. That night, I didn't sleep. I traced the bruises on my face like constellations. Imagined them spelling freedom. I repeated the word help in ASL until the movement became a prayer. Then, the next morning, the storm broke. She came back. This time, she brought someone with her. A social worker named Janet, short hair, kind eyes, and a clipboard that looked like it could split a mountain. They called it a welfare check. My grandfather had no choice but to let them in. Within minutes, the house turned into a stage. My aunts were summoned like actors, cooking, cleaning, smiling like puppets. I was yanked from the basement, Shoved into clean clothes, my hair brushed so hard I bit my lip to stop from crying. They painted my face with powder and fear. I was told what to say. I love school. I'm fine. I was sick. Janet asked questions. Calm, casual. I answered with the lines I'd been given, but I had my notebook tucked under the cushion. Inside were pages and pages of ASL practice. Words, phrases, diagrams of hands forming rebellion. I accidentally dropped it. Pages scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. Janet bent to help. She didn't say anything at first, just read, silently, slowly. She handed it back to me, but not before glancing at the red thread on my wrist. She started taking photos. Said it was routine. The locks on the doors, the bars on the windows, the ceremonial red thread hanging from hooks like trophies. My grandfather's smile cracked around the edges. After they left, the panic was visible. A family meeting was called within the hour. Not just a meeting, a reckoning. He ordered the final ceremony to be held that night. No more waiting. All the girls who speak with their hands, he said, will be silenced. Even the ones too young. The house transformed. Furniture moved. Incense lit. Chants rehearsed. Sickness in the air disguised as devotion. They brought us out from hiding. 12 girls, pale and hollow-eyed. They dressed us in white saris, said it symbolized purity. But it felt more like a burial shroud. We were lined up by age in a side room. I was the oldest, which meant I would go first. The red thread waited on a silver plate. Coiled like a snake. The men gathered in the center of the room. My father's hands trembled as he approached with the thread. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I looked to the other girls. Maya, defiant but scared. Asha, sucking her thumb like she had when she was 4. Kavya trembling so hard I thought she'd fall. The air thickened with smoke and memory. My grandfather began chanting in Sanskrit, voice low and rhythmic, summoning the silence that had ruled us for decades. The room spun. Time collapsed. And then I moved. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I just signed one word, now. And we scattered like birds. The men weren't ready. We had planned every route, memorized every door, every creaky stair, every loose floorboard. Some of us ran for windows, others for back doors. Our white saris flashed in the lamplight like lightning bolts. I bolted through the kitchen, my feet bare and fast, and that's when the miracle happened. The women moved. Not away, not to stop us. For us! My Aunt Mira stood in the kitchen, blocking the door as my father rushed in. He screamed at her to move. She didn't. She shook her head, and behind her, another aunt stepped forward. Then another. One by one. They linked arms. Red threads still tied to their wrists. A wall of women who had once stood in silence, now refusing to move. And then, like thunder on a clear day, she appeared. My grandmother, 90 years old, hair loose, back straight, and for the first time since before I was born, she spoke. Enough. She rasped. The room froze. She raised her hand and pulled the faded red thread from her wrist, the same one she'd worn since she was 16, and let it drop. Then she walked through the crowd like a blade through fabric, took the scissors from the plate, and cut the red thread in half. One by one, the women removed theirs. Tears streamed down their cheeks. Some sobbed, some laughed. My mother whispered my name. I hadn't heard her say it in years. The men tried to restore order, but there was none left. Tradition cracked. Silence shattered. And we, the girls, the ones who had once been told to hush, we finally heard the sound we'd been waiting for our entire lives. Our names, spoken, out loud, by the women who'd raised us. After that night, nothing was ever the same, and everything was. The silence tradition didn't vanish in a blaze. It rotted, quietly, from the inside. What had once stood tall like a temple began to crumble like damp paper. Some men clung tighter to what little control they had left. Others simply folded, like they'd been waiting to be told they could stop pretending. But us. We had already moved on. The rebellion that began with secret hand signs had become something bigger, louder, undeniable. The day after the failed ceremony, my cousin Kavya's father tried to arrange her marriage. She was 13. He picked a 35-year-old man with a corner store and a violent temper, but Kavya had learned more than language. She'd learned resistance. She recorded their conversation on her phone, uploaded it to our group chat. Within hours, we had a plan. Ms. Brown made the call. CPS stepped in, and Kavya, brave little Kavya, came to live with us. My home turned into a sanctuary. At one point, we had 3 girls sleeping in what used to be our storage room. My dad, once the enforcer of silence, helped paint it sunshine yellow. No locks, no rituals, just space to heal. Uncle Dev came pounding on our door one night, drunk and furious, demanding his daughter back. My father stood on the lawn, face to face with the man who had once terrified him. "You'll leave now," he said, "or I'll make sure you never see her again." Police came. Dev spent the night in a cell. After that, the traditionalists began plotting. We got wind of their plans to pull girls from school, put them on planes, silence them overseas. But we were ready. We'd created something like an underground railroad, a web of aunts, cousins, teachers, friends who could move fast when a girl sent out the signal. Some girls went into hiding. Some got legal protection. Others fought their own battles at home, refusing the thread, refusing to vanish. Even the community split. At the temple, people sat on opposite sides like enemies in a cold war. Supermarkets became battlefields where glances cut deeper than words. Some families broke in half. Some stitched themselves back together, but with new patterns. The old men tried to fight back. My grandfather, weakened but defiant, called a grand council of elders, one last move to force everyone back in line. But he wasn't the only one organizing. My grandmother, our accidental general, had spent those months speaking, really speaking. She visited women in other towns, shared her story, and when the elders gathered in their dusty, outdated hall, they found an empty room. Across town, the women were filling a community center. Over 200 of them. Red threads left at home. Some brought their daughters. Some came alone. Some hadn't spoken in decades. But they came. And when my grandmother stood at the front, her voice steady despite the years it had been caged, she told the truth, named names, told stories. Of slaps given for humming. Of marriages forced for silence. Of a girl who jumped rather than be muted for life. The revolution was no longer secret. It was everywhere. Girls from other cities messaged us, asking for help, asking how to learn ASL, asking how to survive. We taught them. We built a nonprofit. We got a grant. We trained teachers. Even Maya, fierce Maya, started a YouTube channel. Her videos went viral. She got death threats, but also thousands of messages from girls across the world. In whispers, they said the same thing. Me too. And the tradition, it began dying one birthday at a time. Neha, on her 16th, stood in front of her whole family and removed the red thread they had just tied. She gave a speech she'd written weeks before. She told them she loved them. But not this. Not anymore. Her mother cried, then removed her own thread. Her father stood there stunned as his wife said his name aloud for the first time in 20 years. It became a pattern. Girls pretending to go along until the moment they didn't. And once one thread fell, others followed. Some families moved away, found towns where the silence still lived. We couldn't reach them, not yet. But we waited, we watched, and we stayed ready. When Angeli got into college, she sent a picture. Short hair, denim jacket, a fire in her smile. She was studying pre-law, determined to make sure no girl would ever stand where she had once stood. Her little sister lived with her now, safe. When my parents renewed their vows, my mother spoke her own promises this time. No thread, no silence, just her voice, raw, imperfect, beautiful. My father's voice cracked when he signed. I'm sorry. Ms. Brown got an award for her work. She brought us to the ceremony. We signed thank you in unison, a sea of moving hands. Unstoppable and proud. My grandmother died that spring. At her funeral, there was no silence. There were speeches, songs, stories. Women who once believed they had nothing to say now spoke for hours. My grandfather sat in the front row, shrunken, stunned. Without her voice beside him, he looked like a ghost, lost in a world he no longer understood. By the time I left for college, the red thread was gone from nearly every wrist. The silence was no longer a rule. It was a memory. Sometimes, I still sign. Not because I have to, but because I can. We teach it to every new girl in the family, just in case. But now, it's not a language of survival. It's a language of choice, of pride, of freedom. On the morning I packed for college, I looked at the old red thread I'd kept tucked in my drawer. The last one. The first one. I picked up a pair of scissors and cut. I didn't cry. I didn't pray. I just opened the window, let the breeze in, and watched the thread drift into the wind like smoke from a fire we'd already survived.